sing no song, they put it. My wet nurse said the same thing. Well, Royce replied, never believe anything you hear at home instead. There are things to be learned even from the dead, his voice echoed, too loud in the twilit forest. We have a long ride before us, Garrett pointed out. 8 days, maybe 9, and night is falling. Zoe, my voice glanced at the sky with disinterest. It does that every day about this time. Are you unmanned by the dark, Garrett? Look and see the tightness around Garrett's mouth, the bed, suppressed anger in his eyes under the thick black hood of his cloak. Garrett had spent 40 years in the Night's Watch, man and boy, and he was not accustomed to being made light of. Yet it was more than that. Under the wounded pride, Will could sense something else in the older man. You could taste it, a nervous tension that came perilously close to fear. Will shared his unease. He had been 4 years on the wall, the first time he had been sent beyond. All the old stories had come rushing back, and his bowels had turned to water. He had laughed about it afterwards. He was a veteran of 100 rangings by now, and the endless dark wilderness that the southern called the haunted forest had no more terrors for him. Until tonight, something was different tonight. There was an edge to this darkness that made his hackles rise. 9 days they had been riding north and northwest, and then north again, farther and farther from the wall, hard on the track of a band of wildling raiders. Each day had been worse than the day that had come before it. Today was the worst of all. A cold wind was blowing out of the north, and it made the trees rustle like living things. All day, Will had felt as though something were watching him. Something cold and implacable that loved him not. Garrett had felt it too. Will wanted nothing so much as to ride hell-bent for the safety of the wall. But that was not a feeling to share with your commander. Especially not a commander like this one. Zoe Malvoice was the youngest son of an ancient house with too many heirs. He was a handsome youth of 18, grey-eyed and graceful and slender as a knight. Mounted on his huge black destrier, the Knight towered above Will and Garrett on their smaller garrets. He wore black leather she never saw me. When I got closer, I saw that she wasn't moving neither. Despite himself, he shivered. You have a chill? Royce asked. Some. Will muttered. The wind, my lord. The young knight turned back to his grizzled man at arm's frost. Fallen leaves whispered past them. And Royce, destrier, moved restlessly. What do you think might have killed these men, Garrett? Sir Waymar asked casually. He adjusted the drape of his long sable cloak. It was the cold, Garrett said with iron certainty. I saw men freeze last winter, and the one before, when I was half a boy. Everyone talks about snows 40 foot deep, and how the ice winds come howling out of the north, but the real enemy is the cold. It steals up on you quieter than will, and at first you shiver and your teeth chatter, and you stamp your feet and dream of mulled wine and nice hot fires. It burns. It does. Nothing burns like the cold, but only for a while. Then it gets inside you and starts to fill you up, and after a while you don't have the strength to fight it. It's easier just to sit down or go to sleep, they say. You don't feel any pain towards the end. First you go weak and drowsy, and everything starts to fade, and then it's like sinking into a sea of warm milk, peaceful like. Such eloquence, Garrett, Sir Waymar observed. I never suspected you had it in you. I've had the cold in me too, Lord Lake. Garrett pulled back his head, giving Sir Waymar a good long look at the stumps where his ears had been. 2 ears, 3 toes, and the little finger of my left hand. I got off late. We found my brother frozen at his watch, with a smile on his face. So Waymar shrugged. You ought to dress more warmly, Garrett. Garrett glared at the lordling. The scars around his ear holes flushed red with anger where Maester Aemon had cut the ears away. We'll see how warm you can dress when the winter comes. He pulled up his hood and hunched over his garron, silent and sullen. If Garrett said it was the cold, Will began. Have you drawn any watches this past week, Will? Yes, my lord. There never was a week when he did not draw a dozen bloody watches. What was the man driving at? And how did you find the wall? Weeping, Will said, frowning. He saw it clear enough now that the lordling had pointed it out. They couldn't have froze, not if the wall was weeping. It wasn't cold enough. Royce nodded. Bright lad. We've had a few light frosts this past week, and a quick flurry of snow now and then, but surely no cold. Fierce enough to kill 8 grown men clad in fur and leather. Let me remind you, with shelter near at hand, and the means of making fire. The knight's smile was cocksure. Will, lead us there. I would see these dead men for myself. And then there was nothing to be done for it. The order had been given, and honor bound them to obey. Will went in front, his shaggy little garron picking the way carefully through the undergrowth. A light snow had fallen the night before, and there were stones and roots hidden, things lying just under its crust, waiting for the careless and the unwary. Sir Waymar's voice came next, his great black destrier snorting impatiently. The war ugly thing. Its grip discolored by sweat, its edge nicked from hard use, but Will would not have given iron Bob for the lordling's life if Garrett pulled it from its scabbard. Finally, Garrett looked down. No fire, he muttered, low under his breath. Royce took it for acquiescence and turned away. Lead on, he said to Will. Will threaded their way through a thicket, then started up the slope to the low ridge where he had found the vantage point under a sentinel tree. Under the thin crust of snow, the ground was damp with muddy, slick footing, with rock and hidden roots to trip you up. Will made no sound as he climbed. Behind him, he heard the soft, metallic slither of the lordling's windmill, a rustle of leaves, and muttered curses as reaching branches grabbed at his long sword and tugged on his splendid sable cloak. The great sentinel was right there, at the top of the ridge where Will had known it would be. Its lowest branches, a bare foot of the ground, Will slid in underneath, flat on his belly, in the snow and the mud, and looked down on the empty clearing below. His heart stopped in his chest for a moment. He dared not to breathe. Moonlight shone down on the clearing. The ashes of the fire pit, the snow-covered lean-to, the great rock, the little half-frozen stream, everything was just as it had been a few hours ago. They were gone. All the bodies were gone. Gods, he heard behind him. A sword slashed at a branch as Sir Waymar's voice gained the ridge. He stood there beside the sentinel, long sword in hand, his cloak billowing behind him as the wind came, outlined nobly against the stars for all to see. Get down, Will whispered urgently. Something's wrong. Royce did not move. He looked down at the empty clearing and laughed. Your dead men seem to have moved well. Will's voice abandoned him. He groped for words that did not come. It was not possible. His eyes swept back and forth on the abandoned campsite, stopped on the axe, a huge double-bladed battle axe, still lying where he had seen it last, untouched, a valuable weapon. On your feet, Will, Sir Waymar commanded. There's no one here. I won't have you hiding under a bush. Reluctantly, Will obeyed. Sir Waymar looked him over with open disapproval. I am not going back to Castle Black, a failure on my first ranging. We will find these men. He glanced around. Up the tree. Be quick about it. Look for a fire. Will turned away. Wordless. There was no use to argue. The wind was moving. It cut right through him. He went to the tree, a folding grey-green sentinel, and began to climb. Soon his hands were sticky with sap, and he was lost among the needles. Fear filled his gut like a meal he could not digest. He whispered a prayer to the nameless gods of the wood, and slipped his dirk free of his sheath. He put it between his teeth to keep both hands free for climbing. The taste of cold iron in his mouth gave white shadow in the darkness, then it was gone. Branches stirred gently in the wind, scratching at one another with wooden fingers. Will opened his mouth to call down a warning, and the words seemed to freeze in his throat. Perhaps he was wrong. Perhaps it had only been a bird, a reflection on the snow, some trick of the moonlight. What had he seen after all? Will, where are you? Sir Waymar called up. Can you see anything? He was turning in a slow circle, suddenly wary, his sword in hand, and he must have felt them, as Will felt them. There was nothing to see. Answer me, why is it so cold? It was cold, shivering. Will clung more tightly to his perch, his face pressed hard against the trunk of the sentinel. He could feel the sweet, sticky sap on his cheek. A shadow emerged from the dark of the wood. It stood in front of Roy's, tall. It was, and gaunt, and hard as old bones, with flesh pale as milk. Its armor seemed to change color as it moved. Here it was white, as new fallen snow. There black as shadow, everywhere dappled with the deep gray green of the trees. The patterns ran like moonlight on water with every step it took. Will heard the breath go out of Sir Waymar's voice in a long hiss. Come no further. The lordling warned. His voice cracked like a voice. He threw the long sable cloak back over his shoulders to free his arms for battle, and took his sword in both hands. The wind had stopped. It was very cold. The other slid forward on silent feet. In its hand was a long sword, like none that Will had ever seen. No human metal had gone into the forging of that blade. It was alive with moonlight, translucent, a shard of crystal so thin that it seemed almost to vanish when seen head on. There was a faint blue shimmer to the thing, a ghost light that played around its edge, and somehow Will knew it was sharper than any razor. Sir Waymar met him bravely. Dance with me then. He lifted his sword high over his head, defiant. His hands trembled from the weight of it, or perhaps from the cold. Yet in that moment, Will thought he was a boy no longer, but a man of the night's watch. The other halted. Will saw its eyes, blue, deeper and bluer than any human eyes. A blue that burned like ice. They fixed on the long sword trembling on high, watched the moonlight running cold along the metal. For a heartbeat he dared hope. They emerged silently from the shadows, twins to the first, 3 of them, 4, 5. So Waymar may have felt the cold that came with them, but he never saw them, never heard them. Will had to call out. It was his duty, and his death if he did. He shivered and hugged the tree and kept the silence. The pale sword came shivering through the air, so Waymar met it with steel. When the blades met, there was no ring of metal on metal, only a high, thin sound at the edge of the hearing, like an animal screaming in pain. Royce checked a second blow, and a third, then fell back a step. Another flurry of blows, and he fell back again. Behind him, to right, to left, all around him, the watchers stood, patient, faceless, silent, the shifting patterns of their delicate armor making them all but invisible in the wood, yet they made no move to interfere. Again and again the swords met, until Will wanted to cover his Royce's body lay face down in the snow, one arm outflung, the thick sable cloak had been slashed in a dozen places. Lying dead like that, you saw how young he was, a boy. He found what was left of the sword a few feet away. The end splintered and twisted like a tree struck by lightning. Will knelt, looked around wearily, and snatched it up. The broken sword would be his proof. Garrett would know what to make of it, and if not him, then surely that old Bear Mormont or Maester Hangman. Would Garrett still be waiting with the horses? He had to hurry. Will rose, Sir Waymar Royce stood over him. His fine clothes were in tatter, his face a ruin. A shawl